Welcome back to another episode of Avoidant Recovery, where you're going to get sage and sometimes unsolicited advice from a healed avoidant who is healing from an avoidant. Now, I need to very much reiterate, I am not a mental health professional yet, but I have lived a lot of life, have a lot of experience on both sides of the avoidant attachment spectrum and both sides of the breakup relationship dynamic. So whether you're healing after a breakup from an avoidant partner or you're an avoidant yourself and you're struggling with intimacy and connection, this is a safe space for you. And I just want to share my personal insights, some of my hard-won lessons, and hopefully offer you some validation, clarity, and guidance as you untangle your emotional and relationship patterns and start your healing journey. Now, in this episode, we are covering lesbian love bombing, the fast track to intimacy, and oh my God, so many of its pitfalls. So for those of you that have been following me on social media, you would have seen recently that I have been posting a lot about the dating trifecta of trauma. So the trifecta of trauma encapsulates female same-sex relationships, ADHD, which I also have, and avoidant attachment, which I have recovered from. Now, the trifecta has slightly more complexities in its interrelationship. So within this episode, we're just going to be tackling two of the three elements of the trifecta, essentially to set the stage and give you some understanding of one of the interrelationships, and then we're going to layer in some of the complexity once we get into episode 3 that we'll be releasing next week. Now, I'll start off with the foundation of the trifecta of trauma, and that is female same-sex relationship and the dynamics that exist within this. So there is a little bit of difference between heteronormative couples and male same-sex relationships, and this is oftentimes because lesbian relationships will often involve two people, females, socialized to be more emotionally open and nurturing. So there is a cultural element to this, but it's also physiology. And for the most part, we are more emotionally open and nurturing compared to men. But just bear in mind that is a sort of generalization and a blanket statement. It doesn't apply to everyone. There can be difference that exists between the two. So just bear in mind that I am aware that nuance exists. But essentially, it can lead to these female same-sex relationships. It will head down the path of having these really deep conversations and shared vulnerability and accelerated intimacy occurring very early on in the relationship or dating dynamic. And then if you're dealing with someone who is a late in life lesbian, so someone who may have come out later in life, they may have been married, left their marriage, or they've moved towns depending on their geographic location or what country that they're living in, but they may have been spending a large portion of their life or even a small portion of their life in a culture or a community where being open about their sexuality wasn't really accepted or it was sort of frowned upon, a little bit of taboo there. So if they have entered into this relationship or dating dynamic where they finally feel seen and safe, then what can happen with these situations is the connection can almost feel euphoric and magnetic, like they're coming home. So, oh my God, I've been waiting for this experience my entire life. So that's one element that starts driving this. And remember that there are so many cultural differences that exist between countries that we live in, communities that we live in within different countries. So the marginalization and societal rejection that someone may have experienced can further strengthen the bond between these two women who may have shared that lived experience. And this adds in another layer of emotional intimacy and almost this sort of unspoken understanding, like us versus them. This can fast track that. So given that females tend to be, for the most part, a little bit more emotionally open, a little bit more vulnerable, and that intimacy can build quite quickly. Once we layer this in with an attachment wound, you can start to see how this can become a very emotionally unsafe environment, even if initially it feels very safe. So it's a trap that I have fallen into, and I know, God, 15 years ago, unfortunately, I did create this trap for a handful of people that I was dating. Thank God I went and got mental health help, because the trail of destruction I left, I still feel regret about. But anyway, there is always potential to heal and become a better human. So circling back to love bombing. So for those of you that may not have listened to the first episode, but those of you that have been following me on social media, A, thank you. B, I have covered love bombing a little bit. But for those of you that may not be aware of it, love bombing is essentially a manipulative tactic. It can be conscious or unconscious. So when we say manipulation, sometimes it can be coming from an unconscious desire of this person to get their emotional needs met. So they may not be fully aware of what they're doing. Doesn't make it any less dangerous or harmful to the person on the receiving end of it as from an emotional safety point of view. But again, when I say manipulation, it doesn't always mean it's a conscious manipulation. But essentially what happens is the love bombing involves overwhelming someone with affection, praise, sometimes gifts, very much a lot of attention. And it's essentially done to gain control over the relationship dynamic and ensure attachment. So creating that safety. Oh, this person's not going to leave me because they're very loved up. They're going to stay around. They're not going to abandon me. Now, what this does, it creates a false sense of security and trust within that dynamic, which, if it's being done by a fearful avoidant, it will often be followed by withdrawal, inconsistency, and it can even escalate, depending on how severe someone's attachment wound is, it can escalate into essentially emotional abuse. And I'm not saying this tongue-in-cheek. There is actually research and a lot of psychologists that have published work on this, but I'm not going to do too much of a research dump on this, but if you would like to have more of a discussion on this or would like me to send through some of the resources, you can reach out to me on the social media platforms, YouTube and Instagram at Avoidant Recovery or avoidantrecovery@gmail.com. Happy to have a bit more of a chat about the research element and the evidence base regarding this. So like I said, it's with love bombing, it's not always intentional. Sometimes it is very much being driven by someone's anxious or avoidant attachment pattern and not always calculated malice. But then there's a little bit of a grey area that exists. So someone can be unconscious of their attachment wounds, but they can be consciously engaging in behaviours that are manipulative. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with what love bombing in action looks like, here's some examples. So very early on, you might have the person that you're dating throwing out a lot of statements that are exceptionally intense. It might feel good if you're on the receiving end of it, but very intense statements that communicate a lot of love and adoration very early on. Like, I've never felt this way before. You're my soulmate. You complete me. You're so different to everyone else that I've ever dated. And they may sort of feel that at the time, but it's not really grounded in reality. So if very early on in the piece, someone is saying things like this to you, that's a little bit of a red flag. Take pause, because you might be dealing with someone who is unhealed in their attachment wounds. So they're projecting a lot of their want and need for love and affection onto you. And this can be coupled with either them sort of bombarding you with text messages, phone calls, or even just wanting to spend every moment together. And in really extreme cases that can be a little bit dangerous, they might get a little bit sulky and just discourage you spending time with other people or spending time alone. Why can't you just hang out with me? So there's some of the things that you see. A lot of time being devoted or wanting to spend with you very quickly, and a lot of these over-the-top statements that are really out of step for how long they've known you and how deep they know you. And then this will often be coupled in with sometimes them pushing for commitment or labeling the relationship before you really know each other. Now, the labeling doesn't always happen with, especially not with dismissive avoidance. Fearful avoidance, not always. Anxious attaches, the labeling pressure comes in really quickly. In my experience, it might be different for other people, but it doesn't have to be labeled, but there could be a push for commitment really early on in the piece before you really know each other. So you haven't even seen each other with gastro yet. So that's one thing. And then there's another element that comes into play that's often called future faking. So with this, they're talking about future or making very big plans early on. So you've only met 3 or 4 times and then you're going on these big family holidays together, or you're, big overseas trip, or meeting each other's family, or you're moving in together. So it's just making big life plans that are typically considered relatively large relationship milestones, but they're coming into play very, very early on in the piece, which is not healthy and, again, a big red flag. Now, as I said before, it's not always a conscious process that's at play. Love bombing, for both the person doing it and then the person on the receiving end of it, it does make you love drunk. So it's hijacking your nervous system because we're getting a release of dopamine and oxytocin, which is our bonding neurochemical, and dopamine's that reward chemical. That's what social media preys on when you get all the notifications and that positive reinforcement. So you're being Pavlov dogged into loving this person, but essentially it creates this relationship high. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because if you combine it all above, so you're love drunk, you've got this neurochemical barrage that's occurring that's detaching logic from your body, and you're literally just being driven by these neurochemicals, again, making you love drunk. And all of these statements and behaviours that are accelerated and out of step, you're essentially having this relationship that's built on intensity and fantasy rather on building a stable foundation that's built on trust and a slower pace. Now, if this is happening, it's not sustainable. So that's often why you see some relationships that they get really intense really quickly and they blow to pieces really quickly soon after. Now, when you're dealing with an avoidant attacher, for the most part, this is when the love bomber essentially just, they begin to pull away. So two things can happen. One can be, actually three things can happen, because you can have a combination of the two. So you might have the person feeling overwhelmed at the level of intimacy that's being built. So it's gotten too deep for them, and then they freak out, go, no, this is too much, can't do it, off they go. And then it might be, or in contrast, disinterest. So the neurochemical hijack is starting to wane, and then that's where they go, oh, I don't feel as love drunk around this person as I did a few weeks ago. Maybe it's the person, maybe I don't love them. And that's where that disinterest comes in. And oftentimes that's when you'll hear the statements, I'm not sure what's happened, I've lost feelings for you, blah, blah, blah. And again, you can have a combination of the two. So they might feel overwhelmed because things have gotten too intense, and that neurochemical love drunk hijacking is starting to wane. Either way, you will end up with the avoidant attacher starting to pull away. And it can happen suddenly, so they may ghost you, they just vanish without a trace. You might get a blindside breakup 12 hours before you're the love of their life, and then the next thing, I have no feelings for you, this is done. Or they might do the slow fade. So where are you left? You are typically left highly confused, exceptionally dysregulated, and just basically left there in emotional distress and rubble, thinking, what the fuck just happened? Now, because we have this love drunk phenomenon happening and often that really high levels of positive reinforcement, it can make it very difficult to spot red flags if we're not self-aware, taking pause and going quite slow in this process. So whilst the examples I was sharing just before, they might feel really great at the time when you're on the receiving end of them, you need to take pause. If this is happening, be very, very careful. Proceed with extreme caution, and you might want to ask them a few more questions about their relationship history, their emotional health, before you allow yourself to get too deep into this, because it is a huge red flag. And if you don't do this, which I have done this to people and I have been on the receiving end of this of people, but what will happen is the people on the receiving end of this behavior will often be left blaming themselves for why the dynamic has shifted. They wonder and they ruminate on what they did wrong to cause this person to up and abandon them. And it sets people up for this sort of emotional addiction. So that's that whole push-pull and boomerang dynamic that you see play out for a lot of these relationships. As I said before, both anxious and avoidant attachers can perpetuate love bombing. So people with an anxious attachment often fear abandonment, and they are usually really desperately seeking reassurance. So love bombing from these people can be a subconscious attempt to essentially like lock this person in before they have or lock them in emotionally before they really have a chance to leave. So it's often coming from a place of deep fear of abandonment, not always emotional manipulation. So oftentimes you'll see things like that, a lot of over texting, and they may over apologize or over give, or they just like really fawn and pander to you, and it's, oh, I'm sorry, I've done this, oh, can I do that? So they're really hyper aware of your behavior because they just want to continually please you so you don't leave them. So they very much may idealize you very early on in the piece, and they will try and move the relationship forward quite quickly, which often comes into the labeling the relationship. Now, with avoidant attachment, it does seem counterintuitive, but in those with a fearful avoidant attachment, they have it's a convergence of the two. So they do have that extreme fear of intimacy and connection because early on in the piece, their relationship dynamics from parents or caregivers or whatever was happening when they were developing as a child, connections were often not emotionally and even sometimes physically not safe. But fearful avoidance, they have this avoidant tendency, but they also have that fear of abandonment driving as well. So this is where you'll see that hot and heavy pushing and then that really rapid pulling back. So that's why it may seem counterintuitive. But yes, avoidance, fearful avoidance especially, can love bomb. And these are often the ones that cause so much of that relational distress. So initially, they might start strong. They come out of the gates really fast. So this is often, again, trying to sort of hook someone in before they emotionally retreat. So they want that safety and security of that relationship. And the love bombing for them is often serving as a bit of like a shield. So it's kind of creating this illusion of deep connection very early on. And then what you'll often see is they'll use this to sort of justify their behavior later on, going, oh, my feelings just faded, oh, it was too much, because it's gotten too intense for them, which is often a situation that they've created. Two people can create this dynamic, but sometimes it's the fearful avoidant that's driving this, and then they feel overwhelmed and then they retreat. Now, why it can be so damaging and dysregulating is because of the internal turmoil of the fearful avoidant. Now, remember, I'm not a mental health professional yet, but I am talking from my lived experience. I had both being the fearful avoidant, experiencing these feelings, but also being on the receiving end of a fearful avoidant who is experiencing this as well. So when I keep saying we in relation to avoidance, this is talking from the historical perspective of who I am or who I was, because like I said, I have done 15 years of work with various mental health professionals to overcome my attachment wounds. So I am very much sitting in that secure attached space, but I can very much speak to this from my experience of being the fearful avoidant, but also being on the receiving end of a fearful avoidant breakup. But avoidance, we're often very good at the performance of intimacy as opposed to actually feeling it, because we're often so dysregulated and disconnected from ourselves internally. So we can be very good at saying all the right things, being incredibly affectionate and projecting all of this love and adoration on the person because we do genuinely feel it at the time, but we're also exceptionally disconnected from ourselves underneath because there is a lot of chaos, trauma, unhealed wounds bubbling under the surface. And this is where there's so you can feel compassion for the people that are actually unhealed and they're just existing in the chaos, because the external chaos that you may be experiencing, oftentimes they're feeling that internally as well at times. But because it's freaking exhausting if you do exist in this reality all the time, avoidance, we can become very good at disconnecting from ourselves. So you kind of compartmentalize, like, this is the happy part of my life, the person that I'm love bombing, they're patching up and giving me some of this positive reinforcement because internally I feel awful, externally they're making me feel great. I'm just going to push this emotional dysregulation to the side. But it's like trying to push a blown up beach ball underwater. You can only hold it down for so long before it bursts to the surface. So this is where the chaos is created. It's not excusing it, but it's just hopefully giving you some insights as to why it happens. At the end of the day, it just leads to absolute confusion, chaos, and your emotional dysregulation when they suddenly withdraw or become cold. So how do female same-sex relationships and attachment styles or attachment wounds intersect? So just recapping. Now, the emotional intensity element. So remember, when two women are socialized to be emotionally open, intuitive, communicative, what we see is this emotional bonding can happen very, very fast, sometimes too fast. And especially if both partners, or even just one of them, have unresolved trauma or attachment wounds. Yes, the bond can feel electric, intense, and all-consuming, but it's also very unstable. So women who haven't had a safe or an affirming space for their sexuality, that's one element that drives this, because essentially with them, they're finding that they kind of have this floodgate opening where they feel safe, they feel seen, they feel heard. Now, this emotional intensity is often more than just romantic for them. It can feel almost like existential. So you've got this, and then you can layer it in with some of the attachment wounds. Now, whilst lesbian relationships, like any relationship, they do very much include the full gamut of attachment styles: secure, insecure, avoidant, and so on. But given society and the life that we live in, a lot of females may have experienced potentially higher rates of trauma, rejection, or invalidation during their identity development. This can be the young childhood attachment wounds, or it can be later on in life through their teen years, early 20s, when they're kind of forming their adult identity. There might be a lot of this sort of rejection and lack of safety whilst they're building their sense of self as an adult. So irrespective of where it comes from, either way, we can have these two elements intersecting and creating a little bit of a ticking time bomb for nervous system dysregulation when it all oftentimes inevitably falls to pieces. Now, instead of sitting on my soapbox for 20 minutes just giving you a bit of a TED talk as to two of the three elements of the dating trifecta of trauma, I want to share with you a couple of exercises and activities that I've engaged in over the years that I've found has really helped me develop a more secure attachment style and be able to kind of recognize and address some of these unhealthy patterns in relationships that occur really early on. So one, journaling, that is 100% one of the best things to do, because once you jot things down on paper or computer, whatever you do to journal, having a little bit of reflection, it helps you join the dots. So some of the questions that you can ask yourself and journal about is like, when have I felt overwhelmed in a relationship, or when have I felt uncomfortable in response to a statement or an activity that someone has done? So like if someone is over texting you, or if someone has pushed for a relationship label too early, what were you feeling, and what was actually happening within that relationship, and how soon was it occurring? And is this a pattern that you've seen in multiple partners previously? And further to this, you might sort of reflect on and ask yourself, like, when this has occurred, have I felt rushed, or have I been the one rushing to label something or push someone into commitment, or I want to spend a phenomenal amount of time with them, or I get really anxious with if they haven't responded to a text within half an hour or so. So what you need to ask yourself when you're journaling on these topics, are you chasing closeness, or are you building trust? Because they are two very different things. So for me personally, journaling is one of the best things that I think I have done, but also that anyone can do to gain a little bit more clarity on what's happening internally. Now, something that is crucial for healthier relationships, but something that I am still working on, is setting boundaries. Now, this is something that for those of us that have a history of childhood trauma and we were kind of silenced and always had to sort of fawn to parents or caregivers because we were walking on eggshells, setting boundaries can be exceptionally anxiety inducing, but it is something that when you set a boundary, oh my God, you're choosing yourself, and you are just giving yourself a big hug of love and treating yourself how you should be treated, and setting the expectation of what the person that you're interacting with should or shouldn't be doing. So boundaries are an act of self-love. And if someone has a problem with a healthy boundary that you're trying to instate, it usually means that you not having that boundary is of benefit to them. So if they kick up a stink in response to a boundary, that's a red flag. If someone is there for you and cares about you, and you set a boundary, they'll be like, yeah, okay, great, I will do that. And then they will follow your boundary. So that in itself, God, if paying attention to their response to a boundary will tell you almost everything that you need to know about how that relationship is going to play out. So with setting boundaries in this dating scenario and trying to avoid the love bombing fallout that may occur is very much wait before committing to big decisions. Moving in together, getting pets, getting cats, moving in together, so U-hauling, going on big holidays, integration with friends and family very early on in the piece. So, God, on the third date, if you're adding everyone's family and friends on social media, red flag. Very much with boundary setting, it's making sure that you maintain life as it existed before this person. So when you start dating someone, they should complement your life, not overrun it. So you have friends, you have hobbies, you have work, you've got your own alone time that you were usually engaging in before you met this person. Maintain that. Do not abandon spending time with your friends and avoiding your hobbies just so you can spend more and more time with this person, because that's essentially a path to self-abandonment and enmeshment, not healthy. So if you're finding that someone's wanting to spend more and more time with you and it feels like it's getting a little bit too intense, you can use language and statements like, look, I really like where this is going. I am enjoying all the time I'm spending with you, but I really want us to sort of slow down, go a little bit slower so we can build something real, a bit of a healthier connection. And I have these other hobbies that I want to do, and I want to make sure I'm maintaining that because they mean a lot to me. I get a lot of gratification out of those activities. And then lastly, if it's a little bit hard for you to navigate this, and just in general, I do recommend people seeing a therapist anyway, because God, I think all of us in some way, shape or form needs it. So seeking external support. So therapy, and I know there is some cost prohibitive factors for people, but if you can afford to engage in therapy or counselling, it can be immensely valuable in giving you that objective lens where they can help pick up some patterns you might be engaging in, especially for those that have anxious or avoidant traits. So an objective set of eyes looking at your situation and dynamics, they can be really good at helping you pass and sort of navigate through some elements that you may not be consciously aware of. And I do know that there is some queer specific counselling and relationship coaching that does exist that can be helpful in exploring these dynamics safely, because like I said, there can be some additional layers of trauma or just additional elements that will contribute to potentially fast tracking some of these unhealthy dynamics. And even just some online support groups and online communities exist that can very much help normalize your experience and hopefully reduce some of the shame you might be feeling around either what you're doing, what you've been on the receiving end of, or even just the lived experience that you've had thus far. So I really hope that you got a lot out of today's episode. Sorry it was a little bit longer than I anticipated. I am trying to keep them short, but I do have a lot of words and a lot of thoughts and insights to share on this. So just wrapping it up. So today we had a little bit of a look at how same-sex female relationships can often fast-track intimacy. And whilst that's not always a bad thing, it can be so risky and dangerous emotionally when it overlaps with unresolved attachment wounds. Now, whilst love bombing feels amazing in the moment, it is very, very often a warning sign of an attachment wound playing out under the surface. And recognizing these patterns isn't at all about blaming anyone. It's about noticing the difference between intensity and intimacy, safety and insanity. So real connection doesn't need to U-haul within a week or two. It needs time, it needs safety, and it needs self-awareness. So now that we've covered off two of the three elements of the dating trifecta of trauma, that is female same-sex relationships and attachment wounds, next episode, we're going to be launching into the full trifecta. So ADHD plus female same-sex relationships plus avoidant attachment. Now, I am all of the three, so it will be speaking from my lived experience, but also dripping in a little bit of the evidence that I'm aware of and insights from mental health professionals that I've been working with. Reiterating again, I am not a mental health professional yet, but I hope you've got some insights out of this. I hope you feel seen. I hope you feel safe. I hope you feel heard. If you have any questions and want to reach out, again, Avoidant Recovery on YouTube, Avoidant Recovery on Instagram, or avoidantrecovery@gmail.com. Thank you for spending time with me, and I will see you next week.